Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, and we're joined by a very special guest. He needs no introduction to Gagglers. He's been on many times. He's a good friend of the show. And I'm referring, of course, to Dmitry Babich. And
Yes.
there's a lot going on in Russia that we need some clarification on. And one issue that we obviously need some clarification on is the case of Igor Strelkov, the former defense minister of the Donetsk People's Republic, who has been now a blogger for some years and has been a very ardent critic of Putin, as well as of the general staff. Though one should say he's also been no fan of Prigozhin. In fact, he was extremely critical of Prigozhin during the time of the mutiny. But nonetheless, Strelkov has now been arrested and charged with spreading extremism. So obviously we'll need some clarification what exactly that means. And he's currently in detention. So really, we kind of, this is all rather mysterious. So first, tell us who exactly Strelkov is.
And if I could just throw in there too, is that in the news reports that I came across, it was a member or former member of the Wagner group that was some kind of witness or made some kind of provided some kind of statement, testimony that was interestingly put in there.
Okay,
maybe
so you can tell us about that, but who exactly is Strelkov, and why are we here?
First, I think we need some facts that would kind of introduce our viewers to the context. What is going on? What has been going on with Wagner and Strelkov? Well, the latest news is that several former officers of Wagner who were badly wounded during this war, they complained that there were problems with their families and them receiving payments from the company. Wagner is not just a military group; it's a company that takes care of the families of the soldiers who were killed or maimed during the battles. So surprisingly for me, the whole media empire of Prigozhin is in place. I mean, it is not as active as before, but immediately when the journalists alerted the public to the fact that soldiers have been neglected, immediately Prigozhin's media reacted. They made a kind of investigation. They provided the documents. So the families are getting paid. And this is one of the cases when basically the media worked. There were questions asked through the media, and the media responded, providing facts. As for Strelkov, I think it's an interesting case, and I think we should discuss it not only out of interest for his person, but I think he is a very important symbol. He is an indicator of what has been going on in the former Soviet Union during the last, I would say, 30 years. Well, Strelkov is, I would say, if you look at his biography, he is an incurably romantic person. Let me tell you that he went to the university the same year as I did in 1987. He decided to become a historian. In the late 80s, being a historian was one of the few ways if you want to avoid monotony, to talk about the past times, about the great wars, about great revolutions. People were not expecting anything significant to happen during their lifetimes in the mid-80s because there was this so-called stagnation, which was real stagnation that continued for 20 years under Brezhnev. So he joined that it was very difficult to get into this historical archive institute, this was called. So he was obviously a good student at school, read a lot of books. And at the university, he took interest in what is called reconstructions, participating it was a part of civil society activity at the time. People reconstructed the battles of the past. Obviously, he had some taste for weapons and for military activity. And in 1992, as a volunteer, without having served in the army, he went to Moldova, he went to Transnistria, where at the time there was this clash between Moldovan nationalists and the newly born, mostly Slavic Transnistria Republic. And he, I'm sure that is true, there are a lot of reports that he behaved as a brave man, took risks. And that was his first introduction into military activity. Then in a few years, he served in the army, got the military training, became a professional and started working for the special services. He was, if you want, a military person serving the special services. I understand it may sound strange, but he was like the part of the army that helped the security service, FSB. And he took part in the war in Chechnya. He took part in the war in Yugoslavia as a volunteer. And then we see him in Donbass, where
Sorry, when you said Yugoslavia, did he go to Bosnia or Kosovo? Do you happen to know?
He went to Bosnia. Okay. So it was in 1995. So it was not 1999. Obviously, already in 1999 he couldn't go because he had a tenure with either with the FSB or maybe he also worked as a member of private guard services, And so he was in Bosnia in 1995, and then in 2014 he surfaced in the Donetsk People's Republic, which was in a very difficult situation at the time. Basically, Ukrainian army was attacking that region using tanks, planes, and people there were barely armed. So suddenly he appeared with a lot of money and with several professional aides with him, heavily armed. And we see him organizing the defense of several towns in Donetsk region. Particularly famous was his defense of Slavyansk, which is a town located about 200 miles from Donetsk. And Russia still has not managed to retake the town after more than 1 year of the war. So at the time, he was a hero for many people because he had this old-fashioned officer look, and he was obviously brave. He was not afraid of death. And the fact that with just a few men and submachine guns, they managed to stop the Ukrainian army, which was awful at the time, but which was still an army, with battalions, regiments, with planes and lots of modern weapons. They managed to fend off the offensive of a real army. However, even though Strelkov was appointed the Minister of Defense of Donetsk People's Republic, in a few months he quarreled with the authorities there. He said they were not really serving the people, and he went back to Russia. In Russia, by the way, he became a pretty famous public figure. He took part in discussions, including the discussions of the radical opposition. There was he recorded a 2 hours debate with Alexei Navalny, who was at the time free, and actively participating in political life, in elections, and everything. I think Strelkov was certainly more convincing during this debate. Maybe we'll return to it later during our conversation, because I think it was very revealing. At that during that conversation, Strelkov said things that you cannot say in an unfree country. Basically, what Strelkov did, he said that I decided to go to Donetsk because I believed that Putin changed his foreign policy, that Putin realized the West was no friend, and that Putin burned the bridges behind himself by taking back Crimea. So I believed in that, and I went there hoping that this would be a real action with Eastern Ukraine being taken back to Russia, the Russian people reunifying themselves. But I was deceived, he said. And the reason why
is this the so-called Russian Spring that we hear about? That some
exactly Russian Spring. However, it was the beginning of this process because Russian Spring. These are the rebellions by civilian persons, mostly civilian persons, in the east of Ukraine after the Nazis took power in Kiev in February 2014. So the military action actually started in April, and again, Strelkov was very outspoken. He gave an interview to Zavtra, a newspaper headed by this, to my mind, very odious character, Alexander Prokhanov. And answering Prokhanov's question, Strelkov said, well, when we appeared there, the real action started. Military action started. So the Western media immediately picked up on that, saying that, he confessed, we started the war. That was certainly not what Strelkov wanted to say, and it was certainly not true. The Ukrainian army started the military action. And how can you imagine, people with Kalashnikovs against the tanks, against the planes? Who starts fighting?
Dima, try to kind of connect some dots here. How relevant was he after the start of the special military operation?
Yes, I
think that kind of gets us to the Bagrozhin.
Exactly. It is impossible to understand that without the context of his activities as a blogger and basically as an opposition activist during these 8 years. So there was this discussion with Navalny. There was, a long process of Strelkov finding friends, in the as I probably told you, before 2014, almost no one knew him. So I think some people from the former National Bolshevik Party, which is now prohibited in Russia, the party that centered around Eduard Limonov, so they became attracted to him, and basically, if the West had been smarter, they would understand that in Russia now, the liberals have zero chance against Putin. But the ultra patriots, the people who say, oh, no, the government is not belligerent enough, we should have taken back all of Ukraine in 2014. Putin is weak. He is unable to defend really Russia's interests. These people have a chance.
But was Strelkov already? Sorry, Dima. Was Strelkov already saying this immediately after 2014 that Putin was very weak? Putin should have taken everything then and there, or maybe even gone further.
Yes. And there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people saying it now. And now it is very easy to say it because people say, oh, you see what a tragedy is going on now. If we had done it in 2014, it would be a lot easier. But they don't take into account a lot of circumstances. I mean, Russia changed.
In all fairness, gentlemen, I can remember just recently Putin was addressing some of the families of the fallen, and he admitted that, how to put it, the best calculations were not made back in 2014. It was an admission of that. Okay, I mean, this is something that has been discussed even before he said it. I mean, I've been hearing this conversation since 2014.
But I'm just curious. Was Strelkov saying this in 2014 that Putin should have taken? He was saying it then, not just now.
Exactly. And this is a very good indicator how actually permissive the Russian state was then, and how permissive it has been until now, and even now. Basically, Strelkov told Navalny during this conversation, what I dislike in you, he told Navalny, is that you are very much like Putin. If you come to power, you are not going to fight for the Russian people in Ukraine. You are going to give up. Your plan is, let me remind you, Navalny's plan was just to give up Donbass. And Navalny said that would reduce the number of refugees. And Strelkov said, I think rightly, no, that will increase the number of refugees. First, all the people who can't, who face danger under this new regime in Ukraine. First, all of them will rush to Russia. Second, immediately after Donbass, the Kiev regime will try to retake Crimea. And you will have probably most of the 2 million people living in Crimea trying to move to Russia. So basically, Strelkov was criticizing for Navalny for liberalism, and he accused Putin of liberalism. I mean, the Western media has persuaded itself so much that Putin is the anti-liberal, you know, the most anti-liberal political figure in Russia and in Eastern Europe. And this is absolutely wrong. I think it's one of the problems with the American and European foreign policy in the last 20 years is that they failed to capitalize on the fact that one of the most pro-Western leaders in Russian history came to power in the year 2000. Putin was one of very few Russian leaders, I think the first since the 18th century, who had before coming to power very long exposure to Western culture. He lived in Germany for several years. I think only Catherine the Great had the same exposure to European culture. Even the people, even the czars like Alexander I, Nicholas I, they spent very little time abroad. And okay, they spoke the European languages, but Putin certainly was a huge opportunity for the West, and it was so badly misused, you know, that they missed it so badly. And in order to kind of hide their ineptness, they say, oh, Putin was incurable. He wanted to rebuild the Soviet Union from the very beginning. You know, no, absolutely not. People like Strelkov wanted to rebuild the Soviet Union from the very beginning. And I think the problem with them and the reason why the Russian state until recently viewed the Russian nationalists, the extremist Russian nationalists, as enemies number one, was because Putin did not believe in rebuilding the Soviet Union.
I mean, is this political? Is this legal? How do you explain what's happened to him in the last few weeks?
Well, basically, there was a lot of legal reasons to arrest him because he made just calumnious, absolutely devastating and unfounded critical remarks about the leaders of Donetsk People's Republic. Like he insulted many times Zakharchenko, who was later killed by the Ukrainian special forces. You probably remember that person, right?
Do we know that? Do we know that for sure that he was killed by the Ukrainian special forces? Because there are a lot of conspiracy theories that I've come across where they say that it wasn't the Ukrainians who killed him.
Well, that was the version pushed by Kiev itself in the first hours after his death, but they were so openly jubilant. And okay, how come that two other prominent leaders of the Russian Spring, you know, Motorola, whose real name was Arsen Pavlov, and Mikhail Tolstych, his nickname was Kivi. How come they were killed just weeks before him and killed in very, very elaborate ways? You know, they put bombs in the elevators. They sent special agents to put, explosives in Tolstych's office. No, I think it's the same story. Like, you know, in the beginning, Kiev did not take responsibility for bombing the Crimean Bridge last year. And recently they said, okay, yes, it was us. So basically, everyone understood that the real enemies of Zakharchenko were not inside the Donetsk People's Republic. They were the Ukrainian special services. Again, with Strelkov, the fact that he is arrested doesn't mean that the Ukrainian regime doesn't hate him or that the West doesn't hate him. They made him the scapegoat for the crash of the plane, MH17. He is the main, he was declared to be the main person responsible for that by the Dutch court, even though, of course, it was, the whole court was held in absentia, and somehow Zelensky let go the only person in the he was a former officer of DNR's anti-aircraft defense, and Zelensky took hold of him and suddenly released him. So how come their story can be kept together if obviously Zelensky freed that person? So basically, there's a lot of threats for Strelkov's health and life, and maybe the fact that he's detained, his detention is a security measure in a way. He is not afraid. You can accuse him of being inconsequential. You can accuse him of being too romantic. You can accuse him of being cruel, because he took part in so many wars. But you cannot accuse him of being a cop.
But we have been told that the legal charge against them is extremism. Can you explain to us what that means, what it could possibly mean?
Well, he is an open monarchist, and he basically said
that's not illegal.
That's not extremism. I agree. Just to give you an idea.
What does that mean? He wants to restore the Romanovs? I mean, is that it? Or what does it mean to be a monarchist?
Well, he just said that there is absolutely no nostalgia about the Soviet Union in his opinions. For him, the Russian Empire is his country of dreams, and he wants to restore the Russian Empire, not the Soviet Union. And culturally, historically, there is a lot of truth in what he's saying. The other problem is that you can strive to achieve certain thing, but you can understand that it is not achievable. Like Jews pray at the Western Wall, but it doesn't mean that all of them, in fact, dream of the Great Temple being restored, tomorrow or the day after tomorrow.
Well, I mean, the problem with restoring the empire is you don't have a czar. Okay, so I mean, there's a lot of problems. But Dima, I want to keep pressing you on this here. I mean, what does it mean to be charged with extremism? I mean, having a off-color opinion, is that extreme?
Well, this is what even the liberal
press
press
just to follow up on Peter, he did issue that blog when he called Putin a non-entity and that it will be a curse on Russia if
there are literally millions of people in Russia who publicly call Putin a non-entity, and that has been continuing for many years. And the majority of Russians have been publicly calling Yeltsin a non-entity. So it's not a crime, it's something that happens all the time here, and it's still not a really authoritarian society. No, I think I agree with Независимая Газета, which recently published an article about that, saying that detention is a sort of protection for Strelkov, because he obviously can be targeted by the Ukrainian special services or just by nationalist groups from Ukraine who have their own accounts with him and who want to settle scores.
Well,
so in a way, it's a protection.
I'm sorry, why don't they just say for his protection? I mean, this has been into a story that it's very difficult to comprehend.
This is the problem. This is the problem.
And good history to it, but I mean, so. He's being charged with extremism, but he's being detained for his own protection. I mean, does that make sense?
This is the problem with Russia's image, I think, for many years. A lot of actions and statements are just inconsequential. I agree with you in that sense. Probably it would make more sense to say that this is done for his protection, but maybe someone at the top decided that this could be seen as a weakness, right? And also, let me tell you that this decision, I think, was taken in the context of this recent mutiny by Prigozhin, which in fact, I think was not dangerous. I mean, when the Western media says, oh, Putin was at the brink, there were it was such a danger. No, Prigozhin acted, I think, in his own interest. He was disappointed. Obviously, he was removed from the front. His influence was falling, and he wanted to attract attention. And look, if he had been really dangerous, do you think they would let him go? And Lukashenko would not say, would not know where he is right now. No, I think it's a very, Russian society is not as controlled and totalitarian as the modern German society, or even as Polish society. There are many vectors in Russia. There are many, there are many blank spots in what is going on around us.
When you look at and I'd like George's thoughts on this too. I mean, in the Western narrative, the normative Western narrative on Russia is that they can't conceive someone more to the right than Putin. And we all know that Putin has been basically centrist his entire time in high office here. And I think that's what makes this story kind of complicated for people because, well, I mean, if Putin is at one extreme, how can someone be even more extreme than he is? I've been for decades, I've been trying to explain to people that that's not to use Dima's word, that's not the vector here.
But there's also the question that but there's just the issue that, I mean, Prigozhin, he mounts a mutiny and Strelkov comes out very strongly against him. I mean, it's he came out a lot more strongly against him than many people. I mean, so he was, very vocal about it. So it seems very odd that Prigozhin, where he's let go, he goes to Belarus, even though, apparently he was responsible for the death. So, he was responsible for the death of a number of pilots. Whereas Strelkov, who's just a blogger, he hasn't done anything violent, is in custody. I mean, it doesn't make a great deal of sense.
Okay, let me tell you, I think this is the key to understanding what's going on. If we look at the wars that happened in the former Soviet Union, and they started in the late 80s, right? Why? Because mountains started moving. This is the way wars start. When nationalists feel like, okay, this is the chance right now. Mountains are moving. We can redraw the borders. It's now or never. The next opportunity may be 500 years from now, right? So this is how the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict started. They felt the weakness of Gorbachev. They felt that mountains were moving, and they started the war. And when these wars started, a lot of victories were achieved by unprofessional, I would say, motley crew of very strange people. Just a group of people who handled weapons better than the others, who had some good luck and who had some support. Just accidentally, they were successful and they won these short wars, right? And in that sense, the war in Ukraine also, it repeated the same pattern. These wars in the end of 80s, beginning of 90s, they were won by these accidental ad hoc groups of people. But then in a few years, the sovereign countries, the former Soviet republics became sovereign countries, and they had legal ways to acquire weapons. And they, of course, became much stronger than the separatist entities. The Georgian army, if Russia did not help South Ossetia, would have destroyed South Ossetian army in a second. In 1991, it would not do anything with it. In 2008, it was tens of times stronger. The same story with Azerbaijan. Of course, Nagorno-Karabakh, that militia was very strong in the 90s, and they had their moment of success. They were lucky, but of course, Azerbaijan is strong, and of course, it won the war, right? In 2020. So in Ukraine, the war in 2014 was very amateurish. The Ukrainian army was not a serious force. Suddenly you have someone like Strelkov and Cossacks. Now you cannot lead the war with such people. They will die and they will lead other people to death because we have NATO against us and we have a war of high technology. So I think the state in Russia is trying to remove all sorts of, Cossack activity, all sorts of what we call Makhnovshina, by the name of that famous Ukrainian surgeon. Anarchist armies, these things should just disappear. This is the idea of the state here, because it's not It's not a good time for this kind of improvisation. You need a real army, with long-standing support, with modern weapons, with all the might of the state behind it. So I think this is the reason why Prigozhin was no longer needed, and why Strelkov was isolated.
I get the Prigozhin part. I easily understand that. I mean, and I think I will even go much further, is that he saw that element of his business empire that was extremely lucrative for him. He saw that coming to an end. Okay, and that was one of his issues with the general staff, is that we're the general staff, we're the army, we're going to get these resources. We're not going to give it to this private company here that has this loudmouth that spouts off every once in a while and muddies up the waters. But that's a different thing here. He's basically a powerless person.
Well, there is a huge difference. I think this is the reason why they were so much opposed to each other. Even though on the surface, Prigozhin and Strelkov appear like these ad hoc, Cossack kinds of people. No, Strelkov never had any money of his own. The money which he brought with himself in 2014, obviously these were Surkov's money. It was an operation inspired by the Kremlin and financed by other people, not by Strelkov. I'm not sure he even touched this money. He just, could tell his aides, okay, I want this person to
allocate it. Yeah.
So, and his people really fought for an idea. He is not a financier. He's a soldier. Prigozhin is a different story. Prigozhin never fought himself. I'm not sure he knows how to fire a weapon. He got money, found the professionals. They did the job for him. So maybe Strelkov even has some disdain for Prigozhin, just like boxers have disdain for sports managers, right?
They wanted each one of them wanted that particular lane, and you couldn't have they couldn't come to any kind of mutual understanding where they could occupy that lane together. And Dima, there's a huge amount of ego involved in this as
exactly
well.
And what brings them together is criticism of the state. They were both critical of this special operation. They said, probably rightly, that not all the details were taken into account, that the enemy was underestimated. All true, maybe, right? But now it's on a different stage. Now is not the time to talk about the mistakes of the past. Obviously,
so that really brings up the question: how influential was Strelkov? Because Strelkov, he issued these criticisms, I think 39 points, 39 questions or something like that. He issued it, was widely distributed on the internet. So was he getting traction? Was he getting, was he exerting influence over people? Saying, why has the government made all these mistakes?
My understanding is that people may be critical of this special military operation. People may be personally sympathetic with Strelkov, but they're not ready to risk their freedom, demonstrating for him, right? And they're not ready to make any revolution or military, coup in support of him. I think that the consensus in society is, okay, maybe just a few people knew about this special military operation. Maybe it was a mistake. Next time, they will be more cautious. They will not repeat that mistake. But we need to stand together, to stand behind the president and lead this operation to an end. I think this is the consensus among the patriots. Right. There are some of them who are disappointed, disillusioned, and but they're not disillusioned to the extent that they would join Prigozhin or that they would, go out in streets supporting Strelkov.
With all due respect to you as a Russian, I've lived here a long time too, and there are plenty of people that always have a problem with something. Okay, it's always there. Okay, so and criticize the authorities is an avocation of so many people. Okay, but to drive home Dima's point, people will comment, gripe, criticize, but going into the realm of violence and that's just. That's
right. But he didn't call for, but he didn't call for violence. I mean, he didn't call for armed insurrection. So again, so then the question, and again, why arrest him? I mean, he's very critical, and obviously, you know, he did. I mean, if you look at those 39 questions, I mean, a number of them were very good questions. So what again? Then we go back to the same question. I think we've already asked. You know,
well, I think they just the authorities. He may not try a military coup himself, but he may have influence on part of the military, part of the volunteers who go to the Donbass battle. He's a famous person, and you know, it's like Stalin was very, very, very eager to take away Trotsky, not because Trotsky was so powerful, but because during the war, Stalin wanted all the communists to be behind him, right? In that sense, the state wants the patriots to be united. You know, the state wants all the Russians who want victory in Ukraine to be behind Putin, not behind Strelkov, not behind Prigozhin, but behind Putin. And I think it's logical. Also, let me remind you that during in 1917, the Russian Empire was toppled not by the liberals, you know, not by the open opponents of the regime. They joined later. It was toppled by the people who formerly were patriots and who said, you know, the war is not led seriously. The empress is an agent of her German relatives. You know, the Tsar is weak. He is not informed properly. That kind of narrative, Russia is vulnerable to it. At least it used to be vulnerable. Now we live in a different society. But yeah, my impression is they want more discipline and they want.
Well, Dima, keeping with that point, there is that when the special military operation started, there were added restrictions about criticizing the military, the operation, and whatnot. Would this fall under that rubric here? Because, I mean, even though Russia technically, legally is not under a war footing, in every other sense, it is, at least for some sectors of society, particularly the government and military. So would it kind of fall under that rubric as well? Because, you know, I'll be really honest with everyone. I mean, I follow what's going on in Ukraine on a lot of these Telegram channels, but there's never any criticism of the Russian military, ever, zero. Okay. Now, you can see all the blown up tanks, all the bodies. It's very, very gory, some of these channels. But because of the restrictions, people do not give, you know, a richer description of what's going on.
Well, I can tell you that, for example, some immigrants from Ukraine who live here and who now play a prominent role in politics and in public life, they criticize the government in general. You know, they criticize the way peaceful life has been built in Ukraine after the Ukrainian troops have been pushed aside, right, on the liberated territories, as we call them, like people like Tsarov, you know, like Tsarov. Again, the West thinks that these people, they are all old communists. No, these people lived in democracy since 1987, right? And they lived in anarchic democracy, which was Ukraine until 2014, where they had to leave fearing for their lives, right? So in that sense, Tsarov is a kind of a politician used to democratic debate and used to democratic criticism. He, for example, he doesn't often go to Russian talk shows, not because they have a small audience, but because he says, I'm not interested in a talk show where there are no government officials. You know, I'm not going to debate with people who are, you know, just politologists, you know, who are not real decision makers. We in Ukraine, we did it the other way, he said. And it used to be done in Russia the other way. I remember when deputy ministers, Shoigu came to talk shows, right?
I remember that.
So it changed a bit. Maybe it's right because during the war, you cannot ask all the questions that you want to the military. But there is a lot of debate about, you know, the future of this operation. And yes, I think the government does not want too much and too rude criticism of the Ministry of Defense, because they already have a lot of things to do, fending off Ukrainian offensive. If they have to fend off another offensive from the rear, that's going to be too much for them, right? Well, that's natural during any war. It should be noted that the military are learning. They're learning very fast. The mistakes which were made in 2022, they are not being repeated now. The reason why there is so little movement on the front is because both sides learned a lot, and they act very cautiously. They try not to lose their people. They try to lose as few people as possible.
But there is a, let's say, a conspiracy theory which is put about by the kind of the nationalist opposition. They think that the reason why Strelkov was arrested is that Putin is contemplating a deal, basically a cut and run deal at the end of the year, in which basically Russia will just give up most of what it had accomplished, certainly since February the 24th last year. And obviously they want to get rid of the people who would be the most critical of such a deal. And Strelkov being chief among them. Have you heard this theory?
Yes, I read it many times. Well, again, it reminded me of the rumors that were spread about the Tsar in February 1917. That he was going to give up on Bosporus, and dash the dreams of Russia of getting to the Mediterranean. Well, I think basically, if somehow the war could be ended in 1917, a lot of people could avoid dying,
Right.
And maybe Europe would have looked a lot better, if they managed to stop in 1917. I am not against a peace deal, with Ukraine. I think what's going on is absurd and tragic, and certainly no one here is happy about the fact that, for example, that the main church in Odessa was destroyed. Most likely by Russian weapons, but there is a theory that that the Ukrainian air defense could have done it. But everyone here is very unhappy, believe me, right? So I would not exclude the fact that Russia is seeking some way to have a compromise. The problem is I don't see how Ukraine would agree to this compromise until Zelensky is in the pocket of Biden and European politicians. I read the Western press. In Europe they write, if Trump comes to power or if Biden is weak, we will have to fight for Ukraine. So there are so many hawks on the other side. There are so many people willing to push until the end. And what is most horrifying for me is that a lot of them were invited to Russia. A lot of them know Russia. A lot of them, got paid by Russia. I mean, Andreas Umland was a participant in Valdai Peace discussion, Valdai Club discussions, and now he's writing in the Western media, don't let any compromise, if Russia gets any land from Ukraine, that would create such a bad precedent. No. Let millions die. We must stand up to them. And this is the person who lived in Ukraine for several years and who lived in Russia. So the main problem is that the so-called experts.
He was a guest on Crosstalk.
Exactly.
I sat in a car for 3 hours with him, going from the airport in Sochi to the Valdai conference. I remember.
Well, the amount of hypocrisy. I mean, I remember how Andreas Umland used to tell me, Ukrainian nationalists. I don't know. Maybe they exist. I just didn't see them. I live in Kiev for so many years. I didn't see them. Or Angela Stamp. They asked her, "Don't you think that the policy of expanding NATO was wrong?" Putin never asked us to stop. Even after we joined, we had Baltic states join us. Putin never created any skills about it. And this is an obvious lie, because I saw several times during these Valdai discussions how people approach her and how they said, stop expanding NATO. You know, it was in 2004 when Baltics have just joined. So when she says, oh, Russia never raised the problem about Baltics being a part of NATO, that is an obvious lie. I can testify. I saw her. I saw her speaking about it.
I went to a number of them too, and that was everybody saying, but don't expand NATO. Don't do that. Okay, that's everybody's in agreement, you know, because at the Valdai Discussion Club, there's a lot of Russian liberals, a lot, okay? I would think disproportionate, in my opinion, at least. But even they were of the opinion that NATO expansion is something that in society in its totality is against, okay? So
it put them in trouble.
No one in the West can make that claim. Oh, then they didn't care.
Right, yeah. I mean, that's the kind of argument that Fiona Hill puts forward. Yeah. You know, well, I think expanding NATO was a mistake, but this has nothing to do with what Putin is doing now. Putin's invasion has nothing to do with NATO expansion. So yeah, so you kind of go, maybe it was a mistake, but you know what's going on now has nothing to do with any of that. So we're not to blame for it.
Can you imagine Putin attacking Ukraine headed by Yanukovych, you know, and yes. It's simply not possible. Until Ukraine was democratic, Ukraine was safe because the West, okay, it was always under the threat of economic sanctions by the West. I mean, look at the newspapers in the end of 2013. In the end of 2013, before that terrible summit in Vilnius, which actually started, you know, the civil war in Ukraine. The Western press was full of reports how should we impose sanctions on Ukraine for detaining Tymoshenko. Yeah. It was seriously discussed. Russia raised no possibility of sanctions against Ukraine. Simply, you know, if Ukraine joined that association agreement with EU, Russia would not be able to have a free trade zone. That was all. Not having a free trade zone is not an economic
I can remember, Dima, I know people will be surprised by this, and I don't want to mischaracterize it, but you actually defended Tymoshenko because you thought it was extremely unfair that about her detention. It was very much a double standard. It doesn't justify what she did in power, but I mean, the double standard of the West, you know, when they look at political prisoners around the world, but she was also one, okay, a person I didn't like, but I mean, it was a double standard.
If you want my opinion and what I said at the time, I can tell you that legally, Yanukovych was absolutely right to put her in jail. Legally, her position was indefensible. She was the prime minister, and she refused to talk to the president. Who was formerly her boss. You remember that scandal? And she signed the gas deal with Putin, absolutely ignoring, you know, Yushchenko. Yushchenko was just sitting there in Kiev, not deciding anything. She signed the deal with Putin. Okay, they provided gas for the winter, but legally, you know, he had these directives or whatever. And legally, can you imagine, you know, Mishustin coming somewhere and signing a deal which Putin opposes, and then saying, "Oh, I don't care what Putin thinks." You know, there is a certain hierarchy. Ukraine was a presidential republic at the time. Okay, you may not like it, you may prefer a parliamentary republic, but at the moment, legally, it was a presidential republic, and Yushchenko was the president. The fact that they quarreled so badly, they didn't talk to each other, it just shows what kind of people they were. Tymoshenko and Yushchenko absolutely not up to their jobs, but legally, you know, the court and the backup for
we're rapidly getting to 1 hour. I want to ask you something that, you know, expand upon something that George George had to say. Are there a lot of conspiracy theory, what we would call conspiracy theories about what's going on with the special military operation? Is it common? I mean, do you hear people off the cuff say, "Oh, a deal's already been cut"? You know, I mean, things like, because I've heard that, you know, off and on from people. "Oh, the fix is already in. They already know how this is going to." I hear that. I don't take it seriously, and people I'll surprise all our viewers. People have lives to live. They have to take care of their families. They have to go shopping. They go to school. They go to work. Life goes on here. But every once in a while, we'll hear these really kind of like really odd interpretations of what's going on. You're a media man. You know Western media well. You know Russian media well. What's your take?
Well, I would say that there are such conspiracy theories, but mostly they are not serious conspiracy theories. They are not backed by any substantial evidence, and they lack money and resources that would make them a powerful force. And also, our knowledge of history is just too huge. I mean, Russia was destroyed by conspiracy theories in 1917. And people have just been remembering that revolution. We just had the centenary, right? Just recently. So it's like, it's like suggesting, talking about a rope in the apartment of a person who had just been hanged, right? Conspiracy theories may be very attractive for a minority of people, but most of the people just want they want to live in a peaceful lives. They want Russia to win because a defeat of Russia would mean more wars. The West would not stop if we're defeated, and it would mean more refugees and more suffering, and it would mean humiliation not only for the government but for everyone. So my understanding is that people just overcome the difficulties. They decided to get together inside the families, inside the job teams, and they're trying to survive it. They're trying to live through that very difficult period.
But Strelkov himself, I think, is one of those purveyors of a conspiracy theory, because I think Strelkov has been saying that the fix is in, that there will be a sellout. There'll probably be a peace deal sometime before the end of the year, and Russia will just give up on everything. But of course, the West isn't going to give up. I mean, just as you say, Dima, the West will just continue. I mean, they'll smell blood in the water. But that's what Strelkov himself is view, which is, Russia just basically going to give up.
Well, let me remind you that Strelkov is a historian by education. Sometimes historians make that mistake. They expect the past to repeat itself again, 100%.
Well, and being a romantic, because you said in the very beginning of a description of he's a romantic. So you have a romantic and a historian. Sometimes it's not a good mix. No, it's never a good mix.
Well, I think it's very important for the people like him, for the monarchists, for the patriots, they want to be viewed as absolute good against absolute evil. They are the ones who say that Kiev is ruled by Satanists. I don't think Kiev is ruled by Satanists. I think just Kiev is ruled by crooks who got hooked up with people supporting a very, very strange modern Western ideology, which could be funny and laughable if it had not been real, right? And I don't think history will repeat itself 100%. Just precisely because we know it so well, it may not repeat itself. So I don't. Yes, I know that Strelkov is spreading this theory of dogovornyak. Well, dogovornyak is just a new word. It's good that people in 1917 have not invented it. They just talked about, Rasputin and the Empress being German agents and having a special cable from Tsarskoye Selo right to Wilhelm's headquarters in Berlin. Yeah. Now, unfortunately, with the internet, you don't need a cable. You can just pass all the information.
So what do you think is going to happen now? I mean, he's in detention. Do you think he'll be released, or do you think they're going to press for trial and then what? Prison? How do you see
I don't expect. I don't expect any trial. I think he may be released as soon as the situation is safe for him. And I would not exclude the possibility that, knowing that the Ukrainian special services are after him, the authorities decided to shoot him. The worst scenario would be for him to be kidnapped and delivered to the West, because then this trial in Holland would be possible, and it would be a huge, very nice gift to the Russo folks in the West. So obviously, probably they did it to prevent that.
That's very interesting. I hadn't heard that. I mean, is that something that's discussed? The possibility that he would be abducted and delivered over to The Hague?
No, it's not very often mentioned because people forget what happened 5 days ago. But I remember that when this court ruling was passed in the Netherlands, a lot of Russian liberals are very happy because they still have these idealistic notions about the West. They started saying, look, the Western justice acts slowly but steadily. They forget that there are many criminals in the West who committed obvious crimes, and justice will never come after that. I mean, George Bush, the Jr., will keep painting his canvases at his rancho, I'm afraid, until the end of his
Tony
days.
Blair will keep counting his money. Yeah.
Exactly. So, no, this is the idealism of Russian liberals. But by the way, they're the only ones who have not learned anything. They continue to be shocked by everything they see. We're shocked by what we see in Odessa. We're shocked by what we see happening with Strelkov. They're shocked and shocked and shocked. I think it's time to stop to be shocked. It's more or less clear where we're living, in which world we're living.
So, well, thank you so much, Dima. Thank you
my
again
friends.
for all of your fascinating and outstanding insights. Thank you, Peter. And it was another great discussion. And remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.